A summary of events on Saturday, May 22nd, day 31 of the Gulf of Mexico oil spill that began with the April 20th explosion and fire on the drilling rig Deepwater Horizon, owned by Transocean Ltd. And leased by BP, which is in charge of cleanup and containment. The blast killed 11 workers. Since then, oil has been pouring into the Gulf from a blown-out undersea well at a rate of at least 210,000 gallons per day. BP has conceded that more oil is leaking than its initial estimate of 210,000 gallons a day total, and the government team is working to get a handle on exactly how much is flowing. Even under the most conservative estimate, about 6 million gallons have leaked so far, more than half the amount spilled by the Exxon Valdez. Coast Guard officials said Saturday the spill's impact now stretches across a 150-mile swath from Dauphin Island, Alabama to Grand Isle, Louisiana. Government officials and independent scientists said the gooey oil washing into the maze of marshes along the Gulf Coast could prove impossible to remove, leaving a toxic stew lethal to fish and wildlife. Officials are considering some drastic and risky solutions, that could set the wetlands on fire or flood areas in hopes of floating out the oil. But they warn aggressive cleanup could ruin the marshes and do more harm than good. The only viable option for many affected areas is to do nothing and let nature break down the spill. This animation of the Gulf of Mexico oil spill was created using actual overflight information and forecast models from the NOAA and Unified Command. The red dot is the location of the Deepwater Horizon oil well, which exploded on April 20th, releasing oil into the Gulf near the Louisiana coast that has yet to be contained. The animation begins April 22nd, the day the first image of the spill via flyover was released, and ends May 21st. And as we can see, the spill, which is over 150 miles long, threatens hundreds of species of wildlife, including birds, dolphins, fish, shrimp, oysters, and crabs that make the Gulf Coast one of those nation's most abundant sources of seafood. The deep-sea habitats of the northern Gulf of Mexico are extraordinarily diverse. From the incredible variety of deep-sea corals, teeming with invertebrates such as brittle stars and squall lobsters, to flower garden pinnacles swarming with fishes, to fields of sea anemones filled to feeding and a veritable storm of marine snow in an otherwise barren seascape. The images captured in this video demonstrate habitat variety and biological diversity akin to combining a tropical rainforest with a desert in bloom. Bivalves are aquatic mollusks which have two-part shells. Typically, both shells are symmetric along the hinge line. The class has 30,000 species, including scallops, clams, oysters, and mussels. Most bivalves are filter feeders, extracting organic matter from the sea in which they live. Nephridia, the shellfish version of kidneys, remove the waste material. Bird bivalves feed by extending a siphon to the surface. As an example, oysters draw water over their gills through the biocilia. Suspended food are trapped in the mucus of a gill, and from there are transported to the mouth, where they are eaten, digested, and expelled as feces. Each oyster filters up to 5 liters of water per hour. Any oil spill has a great impact on the environment surrounding the spill. The past has shown us that the oil has terrible effects on the bivalves. For one, their major food source, plankton, is eliminated. Many bivalves have died because of oil spills due to high concentration of hydrocarbons. Oil, being toxic, puts filter feeders in danger. Filtered feeders such as bivalves feed by straining suspended matter and food particles from water, typically by passing water over a specialized filtering structure. To make matters worse, oil also affects their reproduction by affecting fertilization, and soon we shall see a drop in population size, which we call the bottleneck effect. Sadly, because the bivalve is after all a part of a food chain, it has been known to cause higher mortality rates in a species because it is contaminated. One major problem is the removal of their food source. Bivalves feed on plankton. However, plankton are very sensitive to leached chemicals. The plankton will often die as a result of these chemicals and leave its predators searching for food. This means that a number of bivalves will starve because they lack the food that is necessary. This is a great ecological impact because other species feed off the bivalve. Therefore, not only will the bivalves die, but also a number of other species depend on bivalves as their food source. Another major problem is the high concentration of hydrocarbons. In 1981, Morin studied the effects of an oyster and mussels after the Amoco Cadiz spill. This spill occurred off the coast of France on March 16, 1978. During the spill, the ship broke in half and released a total of about 1.6 million barrels. As more improved, the spill has disastrous effects on the oysters and mussels, reporting 20 to 50% mortality of commercial oysters and mussels alone. To make matters worse, the tissue were contaminated with hydrocarbons up to a year after the spill. With information from NOAA, PBS estimates that as of May 19, 5,908,532 gallons have been leaked into the Gulf of Mexico. NOAA, however, has the most positive estimate with an estimate of 210,000 gallons a day. Outside estimates show numbers of about 1,050,000 gallons a day. BP also has an estimate for the worst case scenario, which stands at 2,520,000 gallons. That almost is triple the amount of oil that was leaked during the Moco Cadiz spill, and we must keep in mind that it is not oil coming from a tanker, but rather from the source, meaning that each day the amount of oil that is spilled into the Gulf increases. This poses great dangers for the bivalves, because the amount of bivalves that will die because of intoxication by hydrocarbons will double in size to that of the Moco Cadiz spill, and the few that do survive will be forced to live through intoxication effects of the hydrocarbons years after the oil spill. The oil spill also affects fertilization. Several toxicity studies have been done, and they all show that within a few days the toxicity levels are relatively high in the eggs and larvae. A study shown by scientist Wells PG clearly shows that although the bivalves are dying off, their chances of reproduction are also being reduced due to the diminishing fertilization rate. All of these facts are from previous oil spills. It is apparent history will repeat itself, and the effects will also show in the bivalves that pertain to the Gulf of Mexico. What makes the situation worse is that the oil cannot be stopped, so the oil will continue to spill into the Gulf until the leaks are closed. Because the oil being spilled is from the original source, more bivalves will be affected by greatly affecting their survival rate. We must remember, however, that the bivalves are part of a food chain, which means that many other animals will also be affected by deaths of the bivalves. Animals such as starfish and eels tend to feed on clams. On top of the effects that these predators are facing because of the oil, they must now deal with contaminated food or lack of food because their prey is being diminished. Although with time, most hydrocarbons will be broken down within the large organisms, the smaller organisms on which many larger ones feed off will be affected, resulting in lack of food. On top of the huge monetary cost, the ecological cost to reduce the damage caused by the oil spill will also be enormous. As we well know, most of the bivalves will suffer great losses because they lack the ability to flee. However, one group studied the cost of cleanup efforts, and their findings were quite surprising. One thing that they discovered was that the cleanup efforts were often more damaging than the oil spill itself. They also discovered that the oil stays trapped in the sand. To make matters worse, the chemicals that people were using to supposedly break up the oil only dissipated the oil and allowed it to sink to the ocean floor, where it would affect even more marine life. They also discovered that exposure to weathered oil can be even more harmful than the original oil, especially to the young. There is no doubt that people really want to help the environment, but few realize that even the recovery efforts have a high ecological cost, most of which will spell disaster for the species, in this case, bivalves.